The smell was the first thing that stopped them. July 3rd, 1834, a sweltering afternoon in Grayson Hollow, Virginia, Sheriff Elias Dunn arrived at the Sullivan estate with a simple court order: investigate a property dispute. But within 7 minutes of stepping through the crumbling threshold, he would stumble upon the single most horrifying discovery in pre-Civil War American history. The old floorboards in the back room didn't match. They creaked wrong, they pulsed almost like breath. Sheriff Dunn pried them up with the butt of his musket, and what rose was not just the stench of mold or rot, but the unmistakable reek of human filth, blood, and something far worse. Beneath that warped oak floor was a dark hand, dug basement not listed on any deed or diagram. 47 children, naked, chained to walls or each other. Their eyes had seen no daylight. Their mouths didn't scream, they twitched. Some hissed like injured animals, others smiled. No one ever saw the Sullivan family again after that day, and the town of Grayson Hollow was erased from every map within 3 years. This is not just a story. This is a recovered trauma, and you are not ready. In 1831, the Sullivan family arrived in Grayson Hollow unannounced. 5 wagons, 6 adults, and a strange silence that traveled with them. Locals said the father, Alaric Sullivan, spoke with an unnatural calm, like someone rehearsing each word. He carried no Bible. His wife, Maura, always wore black, even in the July heat, and the children, none. Not a single child lived on the surface of the estate, and yet food deliveries to the property doubled within months. They claimed to be building a home for lost souls, an orphanage funded by a family inheritance from the Irish coast. No records were found of such inheritance. The church turned a blind eye, perhaps comforted by the word charity. The local pastor even blessed the foundation stone, though many later recalled he was sweating and trembling when he did. Stranger still, every time someone passed the Sullivan land, they said they heard humming. Low, tuneless, and constant. One farmer reported seeing small pale hands gripping the cellar windows before they were bricked over completely, but no one dared question the Sullivans, not because they were feared, but because they were respected, too respected, in a town like Grayson Hollow that was far more dangerous. Between 1832 and 1834, children began to disappear, but not the way you'd expect. There were no screams in the night. No signs of struggle, no broken windows, no muddy footprints. One by one, they simply vanished, from bedrooms, from churches, from fields. 8-year-old Elias Rourke walked out to feed the chickens and never returned. The McCready twins were last seen at Sunday school, 12 cases in 18 months. The townspeople were bewildered. Some whispered about gypsies or wolves. Others blamed Indian spirits in the woods. But the pattern was clear: only children, always under the age of 13, always near the Sullivan estate. Still, no one accused them. They hosted town meetings, donated to the church, even provided firewood during a brutal winter. Maura Sullivan handed out sugar loaves and wool blankets. Alaric offered work to the struggling farmers, and yet their eyes never quite blinked at the right times. After the 12th disappearance, a boy's shoe was found near the edge of the Sullivan orchard. Blood still damp on the leather. Sheriff Dunn ordered a quiet search, but by the time his men arrived, the orchard had been freshly plowed. The ground was too clean, much too clean. What Sheriff Dunn found beneath the Sullivan house wasn't a basement. It was a structure that defied reason and law. 7 feet down, dug by hand through clay and rock, lay a chamber nearly the size of a church nave. Its walls were lined with hand-carved symbols, crosses without Christ, eyes with slitted pupils, and dozens of markings in a language no one could read. Some were scratched in charcoal, others in blood. But the most horrifying detail, the chains, 47 of them, bolted into the stone like it was built for this. Some were ancient, trusted, brittle, others freshly forged, each one perfectly spaced, as if pre-measured for small limbs. Above every child's position, carved into the stone, was a single word: anointed. The children were malnourished but alive, silent, obedient. Not one attempted escape, even when unchained. They blinked slowly at the lantern light, their pupils narrowing like nocturnal animals. Some reached out, not to the rescuers, but toward the walls, tracing symbols with trembling fingers. One child, barely 5, whispered he's still hungry. When asked who, she pointed upward, not to the heavens, but to the floorboards above them. 3 days after the discovery, a hidden compartment was found behind the hearthstone in the Sullivan sitting room. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn smooth at the edges. It belonged to Maura Sullivan, and it should never have been read. The handwriting was meticulous, almost ritualistic. The entries didn't begin with dates. They began with phases of the moon. First quarter. The 7th child accepted the mark. He did not scream. That is good. The quiet ones draw him faster. New moon. Alaric says we are close. The soil is soft, and the roots obey. The older ones decay too quickly. Must keep them under 7. Full moon. One tried to escape, bit the others. We removed his tongue and laid him under the blue cloth. He will not bite again. There were over 200 entries, each more disturbing than the last. Some described the black maw under the hill. Others spoke of womb rituals and the skinless angel who whispers between the walls. The most chilling of all, her final entry. I heard it breathing beneath the beams. It will come for us now. The feast is near. The anointed have ripened. The next day, the Sullivans were gone. Vanished, every last one. The children, 47 in all, were taken to the Grayson Hollow chapel, which had hastily been converted into a makeshift infirmary. Doctors came from Roanoke, priests from Richmond. But none of their tools, oaths, or prayers could penetrate the wall of silence these children had wrapped around themselves like skin. Not one spoke, not a scream, not a word. They ate, but only if the food was left on the floor. They slept in fetal positions, backs arched unnaturally, as though trained to yield space. If anyone attempted to touch them, the children recoiled, not in fear, but in recognition, as if they knew the hands weren't right. One priest, Father Caldwell, claimed that during his nightly prayers, one child, an 11-year-old boy named Asa, stood upright and began mimicking the liturgy word for word. But it wasn't Latin he was speaking. It was something older, crueler. He said the boy's voice changed, a sound layered and impossible, like many throats speaking in unison. That same night, Father Caldwell disappeared. All that remained was his crucifix, snapped in half, lying at the boy's feet. The children never looked for him. In fact, they smiled for the first time. In the weeks that followed the discovery, Grayson Hollow began to change. Slowly at first, then all at once. People stopped speaking in the streets. Shops no longer played music. The blacksmith hammered without singing. Even the church bells rang muffled, as though wrapped in cloth. Then came the suicides. The schoolteacher, Miss Eliza Dean, was found in her parlor with a sewing needle lodged deep into both ears. The town's midwife drowned herself in the cattle trough. Families packed and left in the night, their homes abandoned mid-meal, forks still full, doors left ajar. By mid-August, only 19 people remained in the town. They all shared one thing in common. They had entered the Sullivan basement. Each one reported the same symptom before their mental collapse, a sound that followed them home, a low, wet breathing like lungs filled with earth. One man said it wasn't a sound you heard. It was one you remembered, like a dream that didn't belong to you. Eventually, even Sheriff Dunn stopped sleeping. He stood in the bell tower for 3 nights, watching the Sullivan house, muttering, "The roots have eyes." On the 4th night, he leapt. They buried him in silence, no sermon, no hymns, only the wind. 3 weeks after the Sullivan discovery, a second chamber was unearthed, by accident. A local named Bernard Tate, the last remaining carpenter in Grayson Hollow, was burning debris near the rear edge of the Sullivan orchard when the ground caved beneath him. He fell 12 feet into what initially looked like a collapsed root cellar. What he found was far worse. The walls weren't stone, they were bone, human femurs, ribs, even vertebrae, all fused together with a black resin-like substance. There were no lanterns, yet a faint bioluminescent glow pulsed from fungus growing in the corners, glow that seemed to throb in rhythm with his breath. At the far end, a pit, not dug, but opened, a vertical tunnel bored straight into the earth, deeper than any well in the county. Tate dropped a stone. It never hit bottom. Scorched onto the wall beside it was a phrase, crudely written in English, but backward. He was buried upside down so he wouldn't climb out. Tate clawed his way out screaming. By sunrise, his teeth had all fallen out. His eyes wouldn't stop bleeding. He begged to be locked away. He died repeating 3 words, "Don't wake him," inside a rusted trunk found in the Sullivan attic. Buried beneath mildew-ridden linens and a child's rocking horse was a set of hand-bound texts stitched with human hair. The covers bore no titles, only a single symbol, an inverted tree with its roots in the sky. The pages described a God not worshipped, but fed, a God not from above, but from below. It was known as the Hollow God, and it was never meant to be spoken of outside the bloodlines. It did not grant mercy, but it did offer silence, the kind of silence that devoured thought, that erased memory, that hollowed out the soul from within. One passage read, "The children are chosen not for their innocence, but their emptiness. A vessel must not resist. The tongue is the first to rot when doubt enters the spine." The texts referenced rituals performed during lunar eclipses and described a ceremony known as the binding below. It involved soil soaked in milk, infant teeth arranged in spiral patterns, and chanting in a language older than breath. These rites, it claimed, were practiced not just by the Sullivans, but by 5 families, stretching back to 1692. The Sullivans were simply the last to remain loyal. The Sullivans were only one branch of a forgotten tree. 4 others existed, spread across the early American colonies like seeds planted in blood-soaked soil. According to Morris Sullivan's journal and the attic manuscripts, these 5 families had a single purpose: to keep the Hollow God asleep by feeding him what he craved. Each family held a different role in the ritual network. The Ashcrofts of Maine were the watchers. They mapped lunar tides and marked the cracking places in the soil where the veil between worlds thinned. The Blaines of South Carolina were the midwives. They bred and prepared the anointed, raising children in isolation, shaping their minds into vessels. The Redmores of New York were the scribes. They kept records in bone ink, documenting failed rituals, heresies, and names of those who tried to escape the covenant. The Haskells of Illinois were the enforcers. Silent men with no surnames who carried out the cullings when a child was born flawed. The Sullivans were the keepers of the mouth. They lived directly over one of the 5 breathing pits, and in 1834 they made a fatal mistake. They stopped feeding it for 49 days. That was long enough for it to wake. July 29, 1834, witnesses, those few who remained, called it the day the soil screamed. At 3:17 a.m., the ground beneath the Sullivan estate buckled, not cracked, not trembled, buckled, as though something massive had shifted beneath the earth's crust and rolled upward. A sound followed, like wood groaning under centuries of weight, layered with wet breathing and distant, inhuman humming. No birds sang, no dogs barked. The orchard trees twisted unnaturally, trunks contorting toward the center of the property as though pulled by invisible strings. Dozens of apples blackened and dropped at once, each one hollow, each filled with tiny, twitching teeth. Then came the mist, thick, yellow, gray, and oily to the touch. It poured from the soil like exhalation, coating windows, seeping into cracks. The survivors said it smelled like milk turned in a grave. Inside the chapel, the children, all 47, rose simultaneously, eyes wide, mouths closed. They began to walk in silence toward the Sullivan property. No one could stop them. Even the smallest resisted with unnatural strength. One by one, they entered the cellar. None returned. Within 12 minutes, the estate collapsed into itself, swallowed whole by the earth. No fire, no explosion, just devouring. The mouth had opened. And it remembered hunger. 3 months after the collapse of the Sullivan estate, a U.S. geological surveyor named Thaddeus Meeks arrived in Grayson Hollow. He had received a letter, unsigned, written in red ink, urging him to investigate a geologic anomaly of sacred urgency. He never spoke of who sent it. What Meeks found, and later recorded in his confiscated field notes, would be classified for over a century. Beneath Grayson Hollow ran a complex series of natural caverns, but not naturally formed. The angles were too perfect. The tunnels followed the stars. Some branched out at impossible dimensions, looping in geometries that defied physics. In the center of his sketched map, he labeled the main chamber Primary Maw. Surrounding it were 5 smaller cavities, each named after a family: the Sullivans, the Blaines, the Ashcrofts, the Haskells, the Redmores. But the 6th chamber had no name, only a symbol, a ring of 13 teeth surrounding a black void. What disturbed Meeks most wasn't the structure, it was the resonance. His instruments picked up frequencies he couldn't hear but felt. His teeth ached. His fingernails bled. At night, he reported dreams of endless staircases and voices whispering from beneath the roots of mountains. Thaddeus Meeks burned his notes, but one copy survived. By the spring of 1835, the U.S. government officially declared Grayson Hollow unsuitable for settlement due to subsurface instability and toxic exposure. But internal War Department records obtained decades later through declassified fragments paint a more calculated and coordinated operation. What occurred was not an evacuation, it was an erasure. The remaining townspeople were relocated under false pretenses: typhoid outbreak, land reallocation, eminent domain. Cartographers were instructed to remove Grayson Hollow from all federal and state maps. Postal routes were rerouted, trains no longer stopped. By 1840, the area was scrubbed from census records entirely. Then came Directive 88V, an internal memorandum circulated among military engineering units and geological surveyors. It contained strict instructions: do not disturb the Sullivan sinkhole, do not initiate drilling operations within a 10-mile radius. All findings regarding vocal frequencies in subterranean cavities were to be classified under non-theological phenomena. In essence, the government had no theological language for what they had uncovered, but they understood it was alive and ancient and bound, barely, by centuries, old rites that modern science could neither replicate nor reverse. It wasn't just about hiding a tragedy. It was about containing a theology that breathes, one that remembers every name it is given. In 1841, 7 years after the Sullivan estate collapsed, 3 children appeared at a Catholic orphanage in Baltimore. They gave no names, they wore gray linen gowns sewn with identical red thread, and they spoke only in murmurs no one could translate, not Latin, not Gaelic, not anything earthly. One nun described the oldest as having eyes that flicker, like candlelight trapped in water. Another was found scratching spiral patterns into the stone floor of the sanctuary with a fingernail sharpened to a point. Within a month of their arrival, 3 nuns had resigned without explanation. By the 2nd month, the chapel was sealed, the orphanage closed, and all records burned under the order of Bishop Callahan. But the story didn't end there. In 1862, Union soldiers encamped near Richmond reported seeing 3 pale children wandering the woods in the middle of the night. Their clothes were the same, gray linen with red stitching. They did not respond to shouts. They did not flee. One soldier followed them for 3 miles before disappearing entirely. His rifle was found lodged vertically in the earth. The name etched into its wooden stock, Anointed. The children were never caught. They were never meant to be. They were delivered. In 1875, a sealed confession surfaced in the archives of a burn, Doubt Parish near Bangor, Maine. It was written by Elias Ashcroft, the last known patriarch of the Ashcroft line, on his deathbed in a locked chamber beneath the church rectory. The letter, scrawled in frantic ink, had only one subject: the covenant of the Hollow God. Ashcroft wrote that the 5 families had made a pact in 1692 during the Salem chaos, not with devils or witches, but with something older that slept beneath the colonies long before Europeans arrived. They had discovered a mouth in the dirt that speaks in blood and breathes through bone. Their charge was to feed it what it required: youth, silence, and blindness. The children were not merely sacrifices, they were sieves. Vessels meant to hold the attention of the Hollow God, to keep it dreaming instead of waking. Ashcroft confessed that his family had failed, that they had let 2 children escape into the world, unbound and unanointed. He believed they had become hosts, walking ruptures in the veil between this world and the one beneath. His final sentence was smeared as if he'd tried to scratch it out. They are not children anymore. In 1912, an American genealogist named Clara Newell published a private family history titled Lineage of the Lost Colonists, intended for academic circles. One chapter detailed the Sullivan line, but not the one that disappeared in 1834. This line had migrated west after the incident, changing its name, altering records, blending into new towns like a vanishing stain. Newell traced them through Kansas, then Missouri, and eventually into a quiet, devout community in Idaho. The name had changed from Sullivan to Sullivan, but certain traits persisted: a devotion to silence, an absence of mirrors in the home, and an unusual number of stillbirths. What disturbed Newell most were the children. Every 3rd generation, a pattern emerged. A child would go missing from their bed. No broken windows, no forced entry, but 3 days later, the family would receive a box. Inside, the child's teeth wrapped in milk-soaked muslin. No one ever reported it. No one cried. It was as if they expected it. Newell wrote to a state archivist that she believed the Sullivan bloodline was still performing its function. A week later, her house caught fire. Her body was never found. Only her typewriter remained, jammed, keys frozen mid-sentence. It has learned to move. In 1923, a series of anonymous sermons began circulating through underground religious communities in Appalachia. They were not delivered from pulpits, but whispered at night in barns, attics, and forest clearings, often with children present, always with the doors locked. They were called the Hollow Sermons. Written in ink made from crushed berries and iron filings, the texts referenced the one beneath the orchard and the choir of quiet mouths. They warned against speaking certain names after dusk and claimed that truth has weight, and those who speak it sink faster. One chilling excerpt read, "The blessed child must not be sung to. Lullabies wake the bones, silence is the womb, and when the silence breaks, so will the hills." Folklorists dismissed them as rural superstition until a linguist noticed something horrifying. Several phrases within the sermons matched the vocal patterns recorded from the Sullivan children in 1834, the same mutterings no one had ever translated. The sermons spread west, reaching as far as Nevada. In every case, within months of their appearance, a mine collapsed, a well ran black, or a child vanished. The final sermon was found pinned to a tree in Kentucky. Written in blood, the mouth is learning to speak. In 1936, federal authorities commissioned a routine remapping of Virginia's forgotten counties. Among the team was a young cartographer named Lyle Fenner, known for his precision and near-photographic memory. His assignment was simple: confirm the existence, or absence, of defunct settlements in the Appalachian corridor, including a once-charted place called Grayson Hollow. But when Fenner returned, something was wrong. He refused to speak, refused to eat. His colleagues reported him mumbling sequences of numbers that didn't correspond to any coordinates, just repetitions of 13 mouths and rootwood bearing. Then, during a debriefing, Fenner took a brass compass, drove it into his own ear, and collapsed. His final map, never officially published, was found hidden beneath the floorboards of his government-issued desk. It was hand-drawn in charcoal and blood. Grayson Hollow appeared at the center not as a town but as a wound, a spiral, shaped tear in the earth surrounded by glyphs and breathing lines that pulsed like veins. The map had no north, only below. Scrawled along the bottom margin, they buried a god. They called it silence, but it was listening. The map was confiscated. The project was quietly abandoned. The land remains unclaimed to this day. In 1949, a coal company accidentally unearthed a sealed stone chamber while blasting through the western edge of what used to be Grayson Hollow. Inside it was a chair, not wooden, but sculpted from packed soil and human bone, and seated within it, a child, or what appeared to be one. She looked no older than 8, pale, hairless. Her eyes were sealed shut with wax. Around her neck hung a locket etched with the same inverted tree found in the Sullivan texts. Her body showed no signs of decay. She had been underground for 115 years. As the workers approached, she opened her mouth, not to speak, but to exhale a swarm of black spores. 3 men died within hours. Another went blind. The fourth, a young man named Corbin Ellis, survived, but disappeared 2 weeks later after claiming he heard her voice through the coal. Government officials arrived quickly, too quickly. The chamber was declared unstable, then detonated. Official cause, gas pocket explosion. But in a private report filed under military seal, a witness described the final words seen stitched into the girl's burial garment. The soil remembers, the children return, and the mouth is no longer sleeping. Today, there is no Grayson Hollow. Search any map, any archive, any census record. You won't find it. The land is listed as government property, unstable, uninhabitable, geologically dead, but the soil still breathes. The locals in the neighboring counties speak in hushed tones about nights when the air feels too still, when insects vanish, and the ground makes a soft clicking sound, like teeth beneath the roots. Children born near the region are said to wake with bleeding gums. Some hum lullabies no one taught them. In 1971, a small group of hikers entered the forest that once surrounded the Sullivan estate. Only one returned. He had no shoes, no tongue, and had carved a phrase into his own chest with a rock. I fed it my name, it wants yours next. The government sealed the area a second time. The trees were raised, the earth salted, and a concrete slab was laid over the heart of the hollow. No name, no sign, just a slab, and the sound of dripping if you press your ear to it. They tried to bury the truth again, but truth, like hunger, always finds a way back up through the soil, and somewhere below, the mouth waits.